is a mind shift that separates the wealthy from everybody else. The wealthy teach their kids this when they are young, but some people never even learn it. So today we're going to be talking about it.
Yeah. So the real question is how do two people making the exact same income end up in completely different financial situations just 20 years later? I mean, we know plenty of people like this, right? And it just boils down to, to choices. People think that it's intelligence, it's luck, it's education, or maybe it's how they think about money, right? Like we got to look at the whole picture.
It's kind of fun, because my stepson's friends, they're all like 25, 26 years old, and we're up here with them in Idaho right now. And, they're all just starting out on their careers, and there's different trajectories that they're all taking. Some of them own their own business, some of them are working for somebody, some of them are trying to start a business. And, this is that time, in your late 20s where these decisions on how you move forward with the money you make is what's going to affect you in your 40s and your 50s and your 60s. So it's kind of cool to be up here in Idaho and kind of see them kind of navigating it at that age.
Yeah, at the same time, I belong to a country club and I'll go out there and I know people that are like I know a couple people out there that are attorneys, prominent attorneys, and they completely hate what they do.
Mhm.
Like, because by the way, I'm not saying being an attorney is bad. I'm just saying they're like, you get on that train and, you just work your butt off, right? And then there's all these things that the wheels come off at some point. And by the way, that can happen if you don't do that as well. I mean, we're talking about life choices. And as we know, wealth isn't just about money, it's about making decisions. And sometimes these tracks, whatever the track is, there's all these pressures and things that go on as a result of being on that track.
Yeah, I mean, I think most people focus on the income. They focus on what can I do to make more money. So they go to school and they become a lawyer, they become a dentist, or they become an engineer, whatever it is, and they're really focused on the salary, but they're not focused on A, the cost to go to school and do all that, but B, what you actually do with that money. Because you have plenty of doctors that make, 300 grand a year and they don't have any they're not wealthy. They make a good income, but they spend it all. So, and then you have plenty of people that own their own business, maybe they're making 70, 80, 90,000 a year, and they're able to save that and put it towards different, they're able to put that towards assets, and then they do become wealthy over time. So I think there's just this big focus, I know I was when I was younger, on your income determining your wealth, and really, that's a very middle class mindset to have because while your income helps, that's not what makes you wealthy.
Yeah, I also think that and the education system is basically also a very, very complex, very good marketing tool, right? Like, because I remember I was having dinner with a buddy of mine. I'm like, oh, how's your son? He's good. He's going to back to school to get another master's. I'm like, oh, and the only thing I could think of is I don't even know what that costs. But I was thinking, well, what's the ROI on that, right? Like there's this belief that if you're sitting in front of professors and getting degrees, that you are somehow going to be worth more in the marketplace.
Mhm.
And now, by the way, that absolutely can be true because we also know I was just with my friend David, his daughter's uh, husband. Is just getting out of residency and he's going to be a surgeon, and that's a long road, and he's going to crush it. Right, that's a path he took, and you got to go through that, obviously. But then there's this other side of it where you see these people, yeah, and they're kind of caught up, almost addicted to getting degrees and things like that. They put book smart education above experience and wisdom,
Mhm.
right?
Totally.
And I think what happens is it's interesting. I think segment one is really for me. It's about the wealthy people. They buy assets, not income, and that to me was a hard thing to wrap my head around.
Mhm.
What's really going to make the wealthy wealthy are really assets, and they do not teach that anywhere.
Right.
Like it has to come from the open marketplace, like
Mhm. Yeah.
right,
Yeah,
like.
totally. But, they don't teach you that in school, they certainly don't teach you that in college, and so you're basically just trying to navigate that, through get a good job, make a lot of money, but then you wonder, how do I really get ahead because everything's so expensive? And, it's almost like buying rental property and assets is not even on normal people's radar.
Well, what they think about is getting a raise, maybe working overtime, finding another job, maybe getting promoted, and these are all incremental things. And then the companies have these fancy retirement plans where they match, to kind of keep you there long term. Where the wealthy actually are looking at how do I start businesses? How do I reduce my tax? They're looking at hard assets, could be gold, silver, oil, gas, apartment buildings, businesses, mobile homes, storage units. What doesn't really matter what it is, but they're pulling their money outside of the system, outside of the what I would call wealth management, and that's the other piece. The somehow, some way and certainly people in my family fell into this. They believe that other people were smarter with their own money than them through their paychecks, slowly just, let somebody else accumulate it and manage it. And I'm not saying they even did a bad job, but it's interesting how little they know at, when they retire at how their money even made money. And so I think that one of the things that obviously is blatantly plainful and aware is in the cash flow game is that assets versus income. I remember when my kids started playing that, they were like, it was a game, so they didn't realize that what's a liability, what's a doodad, what's income. If there's a doctor earning 700 grand versus an investor earning $150,000 from asset, who has more freedom?
Right.
Who's actually wealthy?
Well, that's the thing. People just equate that high salary to wealth. So like, it's so funny because I talk to people all the time and they'll say, "Oh, my friend, he's got a lot of money. He's a doctor." That always comes up. My friend, she has a lot of money. She's a lawyer. And the truth is that if you really dig into a lot of those people's finances, they don't have a lot of money because unless they invested their money properly, they just don't have a lot of money. So it's interesting when people say, he has a lot of money or she has a lot of money. It's the perception of that from their income or from their profession. But really, it's more what the wealthy understand is it's not how much money you're making, but what you're doing with the money. So as we were talking about, you know, most middle class people don't manage their own money. But all wealthy people manage their own money, just
Yeah,
about. So, I mean,
good point.
that's a big one because, when you're not spending the time on this and you're just giving it to somebody who's investing it for you, people that are wealthy don't do that. They understand that's more important. You're so focused on working and making your weekly amount of money that you're too busy to focus on the investment side of it, where wealthy people put most of their time into the investment side of it on how to help with tax, how to help with, wealth management, income, all that stuff, because you have to really understand that because that is what's going to make you wealthy, not what you bring home week to week or the promotion you get or when you graduate college, the job you get. None of that's going to make you wealthy.
Well, I think the other thing is a person that says that, like they're rich or they're wealthy, they don't have a clue. Like they don't know.
Mhm.
They don't even know what they're making. They don't know. Like I know plenty of surgeons, plenty of doctors that pay 50% in tax,
Mhm.
and they spend every nickel of everything else.
Mhm.
So this, to me, this goes back to this good debt versus bad debt. I talk a lot about this. Most people hear the word debt, they think of it as a four-letter word. They think that it's bad. But what the wealthy does, it says, what is that debt buying, and is it more importantly, is it covered by somebody else,
Mhm.
right? Like so,
Right. Yeah.
that's the biggest thing. Good debt, to me, is rental property, apartment buildings, businesses, cash flowing assets, and bad debt, of course, is cars, vacations, credit cards, customer purchases, typically things that go down in value when you buy them. And oftentimes those are financed, not always, but they're financed with these really, really high percentages. And I don't think people look at that closely enough.
Yeah, well, I just think that certain people are really focused on, buying things. They're afraid to buy assets, They're afraid to buy rental property and everything else because what if it goes down in value? But they buy cars and they go on vacation and they spend their money on that kind of thing. Where, if you're really wealthy, you have to look at where you're spending your money and is that making you money? And it's interesting because as someone that used to pay cash for everything, there is benefits to not paying cash for those good assets. Good debt, there's benefits to not having to pay cash.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Because, even me, like, even if I look at, the last 10 years, there's certain things that I paid, certain rental properties I paid full cash for. I would have been better off to spread that through a bunch of different rental properties and get the appreciation on all of them versus paying something off in cash and not taking that debt. So, when you have an asset that's cash flowing, it's okay to take on that debt because that debt is a good thing. It helps you buy additional assets. We were just talking to Tarl Yarber right before this, and his strategy is to use hard money to buy assets and then, basically renovate them and then have the bank, give him a loan because he increased the value 20%. So there's all these different ways where taking on debt isn't necessarily a bad thing. We just think it is because that's how we're taught.
It's interesting that that these people, they buy liabilities. Oftentimes, they buy assets that go down in price, whereas the wealthy, they're buying inflation hedged assets, stuff that cash flows, and they're using the system. And those assets, they buy them lifestyle later.
The biggest thing full circle on this is why wealthy people don't fear inflation. So inflation, is something that hits people that are working for a salary, but assets go up with inflation. Gold and silver go up with inflation. All these investments, the stock market tends to go up with inflation. So they actually don't fear inflation because they're living off of these assets that go up with inflation. While you're living off your paycheck, so inflation also affects groceries and gas and all the things that you're buying, but you don't have anything that goes up with inflation. So that's why the wealthy get wealthier with inflation and it hits the middle class the hardest. So people also look at appreciation versus cash flow. Our most experienced investors are going to look at cash flow more than appreciation. So a lot of people that just own homes, they look at appreciation. Like my home went up, $50,000. Well, they until you sell the home, it's not realized anyway. So it doesn't really matter necessarily what your home's worth if you live in it. But when you're looking at cash flow, that's more of an investment strategy because that's month to month how much you're actually making.
And the irony is, appreciation is oftentimes inflation itself.
Mhm.
Like, that's the interesting thing. I mean, there's all kinds of, most people don't think of cash flow,
Right.
right? They just don't. They think of the effort. They think of, I don't want to collect rent. I don't want to talk to tenants. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. And by the way, your own father was trying to dissuade you from buying,
Yeah. No,
right? For those exact reasons, right?
totally. He was totally against me having rental property because
Which is interesting because he doesn't own any himself, and he's not speaking from experience at all.
no, but my uncle does, and my uncle would complain about it,
Yep.
and so he just was like, you don't want to deal with that hassle, because that's
Yep.
just going to be a hassle for you.
But I remember the conversation, right?
Mhm.
And so I'm sure he heard some horror stories, right,
Mhm.
from your uncle. But at the end of the day, it's been a game changer for you, right? Can you imagine if you didn't own any real estate?
Right, because then all you're really doing is just saving money. And
You're
when you're just
personally, but think
saving,
about that. Where what would your net worth be, right?
right, if you're just saving money and it's not really going anywhere, you're just getting beat up by the inflation of it.
I know. And so I think it's important to focus on what people actually measure. Most people measure salary, net worth, home value, but the wealthy, what they measure is their monthly passive income, their cash reserves, the number of assets they own, a return on invested capital for sure, and then of course time. I'm at the point, like a lot of my friends are at the point where this is really just about time.
Yeah, and I think people really focus on that, what things are worth. When I'm working with home buyers, it's always like, what if I buy this house and then it's not worth as much in a year? And what am I going to do? And the wealthy don't focus on that because values go up, they go down, they're all over. They just focus on cash flow. So, like, if I buy something and it goes down in value, but it's still making, $700 a month, it doesn't really matter to me that it went down in value because that only matters whether it goes up or down in value only matters if you're selling it. So if you're going to sell it, then you're going to lose money or you're going to make money. But the wealthy are more focused on what it's bringing in monthly. And then that what it actually is worth doesn't really matter. It only matters what it's bringing in. So that's kind of this difference shift because the markets, they go up, they go down. And wealthy people just aren't really focused on what their total net worth is. It's really what's coming in every month that they can live on is where they focus their attention.
That's the issue. I mean, I don't save money to invest, right?
Mhm.
I look at my monthly burn rate, all, as long as that's covered, then you got full freedom, right?
Mhm.
You're not using principal or cash for anything,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
And I think, at the end of this, we should just probably end on this mindset shift, right?
Well, this is the biggest thing because, the wealthy, it's all about a mindset shift because you got to stop focusing on how much money you can make. And of course, that matters. Like, I'm not saying that doesn't matter, but if that's your main focus, it's not going to make you wealthy. So you have to focus on with the money you're making, what you can actually own. So that is the difference between a wealthy mindset and then the middle class. So these are things that you can do to kind of change where you are at and where your projection is going to be.